In first posture, we're going to work what's called Zhang. I can't remember what the exact translation is for that, but I know there is one, and I will try to post it in the text description as we go below. But the most important thing, in my opinion, for you to think about is your spine as you go through virtually all postures. Where is my spine? And even thinking about the core, people think about the core as the six-pack muscles on the surface. The core is actually anything that supports and stabilizes and protects the spinal cord, the brain and the spinal cord, the central nervous system, the what makes us go, right? That's the most important thing. If that gets messed with, boom, we go down, right? So anything involved in keeping that optimally functioning is part of the core. So really that's from the head to the tailbone, right? Because that's where that stuff is. So anything 360 degrees around that, basically from here to here, all the way around the body, is part of the core. So I want you to be mindful of where your core is, your trunk, from pelvis to crown, where it is in space, and what position and orientation it is in, what posture you have in that position all the time, and continually just bringing your awareness to your spine. We go back to the importance of keeping the garden hose unkinked so the water can flow freely through the garden hose. The garden hose being the spine, the water being the energy that's moving through the spinal cord up to the brain and back down the front of the body, those meridians, those energy circuits. So first thing, be mindful of the spine. Second thing, foot position. We're in Zhang, typically hip width or a little bit wider. You'll notice that my midfoot is actually outside my knee by about an inch or two, and the outside my hip by maybe even a couple more inches than that. So I'm a little bit wider than hip width apart. You can be hip width as well, where the midfoot is stacked right over the pelvis, the ASIS, that little crest at the pelvis right here, the top front, that little ridge. Okay, so this would be hip width apart, and this would be about wider than hip width apart. You can go wider than this as well. I actually like to get a little bit wider occasionally when I'm practicing standing posture, especially shaking, because it's changing the angle at the ankle joint and changing the way the force is distributed through the knee. So it's got a different feel. I'm feeling a little bit more in my midline, my groin, because my legs are more open. My feet have to engage a little bit differently and structure the bones a little bit differently. I'm a little more laterally focused with my feet. So the width of the stance can change. What feels good for you in that moment, in that practice, in that day is the one that I would choose, and I would say try all the widths from hip width and really wide and see which ones you like the most and which ones you feel you would benefit from the most, and then spend the most time in those, but try a bunch of different ones. And notably, in the different postures, they all will have different feet positions, so you'll be able to get a little bit of variation as you go anyway. But just know that the foot position can vary in width. The other key important thing to think about foot position here is we do not want the toes, the big toes, to go straight forward. Because if you actually look at your foot, if the big toe is pointed straight forward, we're actually just ever so slightly turned out with our foot. And especially if you were to look at the lateral border of your feet, they're going to be going out more like this if our toes are straight forward. So my toes are straight forward here, and there's my foot edges are going out here. So you can see, rather than that right here over the hip bones, it's more out. You want the lateral border of your foot to be going straight in the same direction of your hip bones, which means we're going to have to turn our feet in a little bit. Our big toes are actually going to be pointed in towards the midline, so they would actually cross at a certain point if you drew an imaginary line from each toe. So we turn in just a little bit so that our lateral border of the foot, now this side's going straight to you, this side's just a bit out still. There, that's going straight to you. So now if I draw my lines, the lateral border of my feet are going straight out in front of me versus here. And my big toes are actually coming in, so they would cross, probably just past the camera, something like that. This is the traditional way, the traditional foot position, where the lateral borders are parallel versus going out like so. Now that you've got foot position and foot width, and your primary intention and focus always is to keep an erect, stabilized spine and posture, and keep that spine straight. So there's a couple more cues on the spine, the hips and the knees that we'll get to here, and then you can just play with this. But this is this first base position here. Toes turned in, feet anywhere, somewhere hip width or a little bit wider is my recommendation for a starting point. Okay, now I'm going to turn sideways so you can get a view on these next cues. What we're going to do here, turning my toes in slightly, just a bit wider than hip width. Now we're going to work on spine and pelvis position. So this area here from the bottom of the rib cage to the bottom of the sacrum, actually even the bottom of the glutes, let's say, is called the lumbopelvic hip complex, LPHC, fancy anatomical term for you massage therapists or personal trainers, physical therapists, nerds out there, biomechanics folks, anatomy folks. It's this stuff, all the stuff that moves your spine and your pelvis, okay, or stabilizes it so it doesn't move. In this case, we actually want to imagine that we've got a dowel going along the spine from the back of the top of the head down across the cervical spine, the vertebrae of the neck, all the way down, contacting the entire spine, all the way down to the tailbone, to the right at the top of the crack, that bottom of the sacrum, top of the coccyx, the tailbone area. You want that to be perfectly straight. So if you're familiar with human anatomy or biomechanics, the human natural posture, the spine actually has a bit of an S-curve rolling through it. There's a little bit of a lumbar curve here in the low back, so the spine actually goes into a very, very slight extension. And then in the upper back, there's a little bit of a counter curve, flexion. This is called lordosis, a lordotic curve. This is called a kyphotic curve, and these are natural curves in the body. And then the third is a little bit of extension in the cervical vertebrae, the little bit of that arch that's in the low back. There's a little bit of that in the neck as well, and that's natural and normal. We want to have that, but we don't want to have too much of it, and that is showing an imbalance in natural, optimal posture, balanced posture. But in this case with Qigong, we actually want to straighten the spine all the way. So we're taking the curve as much as we can out of the neck, the upper back, and the low back. To do that, we need to first focus on our lumbopelvic hip complex, this low part. We're going to do all three pieces: pelvis, rib cage, and head. Think of it like Frosty the Snowman, 3 snowballs making a snowman. You've got snowball 1, the pelvis; snowball 2, the rib cage; snowball 3, the head, the skull. Okay, so the first focus is down here in the pelvis area, the first snowball. The goal is to get this curve out of the low back, is to tuck the tailbone between the legs a little bit. This is called posterior pelvic tilt. I like to use the term, if you were a dog, you would be tucking your tail between the legs, or you would be pooping, dog poop. Okay, think of a dog hunched over pooping. That's posterior pelvic tilt. You don't want to go too far and cause a round in the low back and over exaggerate the rest of the spine. You just want enough to take that curve out, and notice now I've got more of a vertical line right here. It's straight down. So I've taken that bend out of the garden hose and now it's straight. To do that, most optimally, that posterior pelvic tilt is the first cue, and then watch my knees. Notice my spine here. As I posteriorly pelvic tilt, I actually sink my body weight down by bending my knees and my ankles. So I'm just doing like a 2-inch squat, letting my knees come forward as I tuck my tailbone underneath me. And you'll notice now there's that flat low back. Okay? That's how we get the curve out of the low back. Now getting the curve out of the upper back, it actually starts from right here in the front. Just imagining, if you have ever worn a backpack that has that chest strap, it's like right about here. It's right below the sternum, right at that solar plexus area where you get the wind knocked out of you. That is what you want to tighten and posture up. So you're pulling it back ever so gently at like a 25% contraction, and then trying to pull that point right between your shoulder blades back slightly as well. So you pull in here and pull in here, and that takes that forward lean out, and you're squeezing the posture line in towards the middle of that spine and then up. We're just smoothing the wrinkles out of the sheets, squeezing here and pulling back here ever so slightly. And now you should see more of a vertical line there instead of the forward round. Okay, so I'm pulling this up and in, drawing my navel up and in here, creating a long tight line, pulling this back, and then I'm just squeezing. I'm not even really squeezing my shoulder blades together. I'm actually just like if someone had a string attached right behind my heart. I would just be pulling that string back ever so slightly, like the reins on a horse, to bring that upper back and upper shoulder girdle a little bit back, so then I've verticalized that forward round, that forward curve. Okay, so number one, snowball number one, we drop the knees and the ankles. We drop down into the knees and ankles, and we tuck the tailbone underneath, flatten out the low back. Number two, we pull the core up and in as I draw back from my heart with a string, getting that nice tall posture line. The third piece with the head is a very gentle tuck down and then back. So this is a famous physical therapist drill. This is actually really good for helping to reverse desk neck or text neck. This forward rounded position is it's a little bit of cervical flexion and then a posterior slide, a posterior glide back. So we're engaging these deep cervical flexor muscles that stabilize and support the head, and then we're pulling that plumb line back again, that posture from the bottom of the skull. We're pulling that back in space to get the head pulled back over the shoulders, so that way we've got all three snowballs stacked right over the top of each other. So from regular posture here, or exaggerated even with the lumbar extension, we want to tuck the pelvis underneath as we sink down into the knees and the ankles. We want to pull the solar plexus up and in as we draw back from the upper chest. Then we want to tuck the chin down slightly and pull the head back in space, so you're almost compressing your Adam's apple very gently. And now we're in that verticalized spine position. Just checking back in with the feet here. The feet should still be in the same position. If you had to move around, wiggle around, that's totally fine. But our toes are slightly in. The lateral borders of our feet are straight out in front of us. Hip width or a little bit wider, whatever feels most comfortable and appropriate for your level of practice today, which may change day to day. Pelvis tucks under, sink down into the knees and the ankles, a little mini squat. Belly button and diaphragm and solar plexus pull up and in as the upper back pulls back. Chin tucks down slightly, and we reach up and back through the crown of the head, getting nice and tall through the top of the spine. And this right here is Zhang. We're creating a nice loop of energy through the body, through the limbs of the body here. You can see this just ever so slightly kind of circular oval shape moving through the body. The legs sink down and they're opening. We're creating this opening energy circuit. Okay, so this is position number one. This took me 6 months, guys, to figure out how to sit in this and relax into it. My teacher, Anthony, he'd always say, relax your shoulders, relax your shoulders. You're tensing your shoulders. Stop lifting your arms. Just allow them to rise. So it's a practice. It takes time to let go of this tension that we have naturally stored in the shoulders, in the chest, in the neck, in our body. So expect there to be a mild sense of discomfort, maybe a little more than mild. But as you start to get more familiar with this position and you're able to relax into this position more, it's going to be more comfortable for you. So stick with the practice and breathe through it and just work on getting in good posture and then coming to your 4-part breath. Okay, so the last piece I'll touch on is the arms, the arm position. The arms are just relaxing naturally in the front of the body, and they're kind of mimicking the shape, the presentation that the legs are making. They're just slightly creating this cupping shape without a serious intent to do so. They're just naturally resting in this cupping shape here. My teacher, I like the example he uses This is a more strict cue for further postures, but it's called holding the rice bowl or holding the soup bowl. Imagine holding a big serving bowl, because again, you're creating that bowl-like, container-like, light bulb-like shape, so that way you can move the energy smoothly in this nice circular circuit. Okay, so we're sinking down and opening that energy circuit through the legs, and then the arms just naturally lie in front of the thighs with that same kind of open bowl shape. And we come back to the posture of the spine and sink down and just find this position here. Last cue on this one more cue on this. You want a straight line, not only from the tailbone all the way up the spine to the crown of the head, but if you were to extend that line straight down to the ground, you would want your heels to be also vertically stacked in that line right over the glutes. So hopefully you can see my feet, that looks better. Okay, so I don't want to be too far forward here. You can see now I've got my spine is straight, but it's not vertical. Okay, I'm here. And you don't want to have the butt behind you with a vertical spine either. That's tougher to do without anteriorly tilting the pelvis and extending the lumbar spine. But you get the idea where I don't want to be straight spine here with my butt behind me, and I don't want to be straight spine here with my hips in front of me. I want the heel, tailbone, sacrum, lumbar spine, thoracic spine, cervical spine, and top of the head, all to have an imaginary line vertically going straight down where they're making contact. So I can't see myself in the camera. Hopefully that's a good example for you guys. But you'll have to play around with your weight shift. I feel like I'm on my heels now, so you might be able to see my hips are actually, even though I've got a nice spine, my hips are behind my heels. It feels a little uncomfortable. Okay, now I'm coming off my heels, I'm far forward, and even though I'm vertical in the spine, I'm actually in front of my heels. And then getting that weight distributed across all three focus points of the foot, the first metatarsal, the ball of the big toe, the ball of the pinky toe, the fifth metatarsal, and the heel point, that nice tripod triangle shape. You've got weight evenly distributed in your feet across all 3 points of the foot. So you've got a wide tripod base and a vertical line from the heels all the way up. The arms are relaxed in front with that nice relaxed bowl shape without letting yourself collapse down. Find that vertical line, and we just hold. You can do this with eyes open or eyes closed. I like both. With eyes open, it really brings you into the present moment in your environment, in your surroundings, because you've stilled yourself so much. There's less going on that's taking up bandwidth in your conscious awareness. You have more mind power to focus your attention on other things in your environment. So when your eyes are open, you're in a very present, focused state, just taking in your environment and really immersing yourself with the environment, becoming one with the environment. The self and the environment merge as you're present to it, witness to it. What a great analogy for relationships with other people as well. And then to close the eyes is to withdraw the senses from your external environment, from your external world, and bring them into your internal environment, your internal world, focusing more on your breath and the postural position of your body, and more of that meditative state of self-inquiry, maybe thinking about contemplating on thoughts as rather than observing the occurrences in your environment. So both are very powerful, and it is a different tool for a different outcome. It's whatever you're desiring in that practice. So we're sinking down. We just find stillness. You can kind of play around a little bit, but this is your base pose. You just want to spend time orienting your body in this position, acclimating your body to this position. Your 10 to 15 minute practice is just to spend time turning those toes in, widening your stance, sinking your pelvis, knees and ankles down as you tuck your tailbone between your legs, pulling your core in slightly, drawing your upper chest back, pulling the chin up and in and back, dropping the arms down in front of the body naturally. So this is your Zhang position. Just spend time in this position. If you can hold it for 10 to 15 minutes, perfect.